Hey, what's happening, everybody? It's Brent X. It's Mike Curtis. We're here with you live on Facebook and on YouTube. Usually, Mike and I, we got the fancy graphic that surrounds the screen. It says Syracuse Basketball postgame. But we're here in the offseason. But what offseason? It has been insane since Syracuse lost to Houston Saturday night, both on the men's and women's basketball side of things. And, Mike, the latest thing today, we're going to go over everything. It's been very busy the past few days. We've been writing about this constantly at syracuse.com, social media, aflame, or wherever else you want to go. Sports Talk Radio, my radio show, the lines are lighting up. Kadary Richmond has entered the transfer portal. That goes along with Robert Braswell and John Bolajak, who have entered the transfer portal. There could be more. Jim Boeheim told me on the radio yesterday anywhere from 4 to 6 players on the men's team could go in. At last count, 8 women's basketball players are in the portal. Yeah. So we're in a new normal here, Mike, in college basketball. This is insane to see. I mean, that's half a roster that's in the transfer portal here. So how you taking all this in right now? We're certainly going to respond to some of your comments coming up here. But, Mike, is your head spinning here? How you taking all this in right now?
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. It's been really interesting to watch everything unfold like in real time over the past couple of days. I think 3 players from the women decided to put their name in the portal on Friday, and then another 5 did it on Monday. And then you got the men. The dominoes are starting to fall with the men. So it's kind of like it's giving me the NBA trade deadline offseason type of vibes where deals are just coming in left and right, back to back to back. It's definitely been interesting to see, and like both teams are going to look completely different next season.
Kadary Richmond's the big one, Mike. When we started to look at the players coming out, everyone started to speculate. Okay, well, who are some of these other names that could go, right? And everybody seemed to come to an agreement. The one guy on this roster that you didn't want to see enter the transfer portal was Kadary Richmond. Well, as we speak here, just about 1 o'clock Eastern time on Tuesday, just about an hour ago, Kadary Richmond did put his name, and we found out that he put his name into the transfer portal. And fans are upset. Social media has been going crazy. Fans certainly saw the development of Kadary Richmond this year into what could be a future All-ACC player, a future All-American. There was debate and discussion all year. Mike, you and I talked about it on postgame about the minute distribution between Kadary Richmond and Joe Girard. And now that Kadary is in the transfer portal, fans are upset. And I think they've got to, listen, no one player is bigger than the program. Syracuse basketball has got an amazing track record. I think you've got to put some sort of trust into the coaching staff that they're going to go out there and find somebody to replace him. Now, that being said, Mike, this is different than like a one-and-done basketball player or a recruit you miss out on. Or, there have been 5-star recruits Syracuse had committed and never came here. Darius Baisley and Dior Johnson being an example of that. The difference here is this is a player Syracuse fans saw, were excited about, and now they're going to see him go develop into the best player he can be somewhere else. That stings.
Yeah, there are reports that Florida State and Kentucky are already on his radar. So I know it's going to hurt for Syracuse fans to see him go play elsewhere, especially when you saw what he can do as a player as a freshman. As soon as he came in the game, he impacted the game on both ends of the floor, whether it was offense, whether it's defense. He was really good at the top of that zone. And you don't have a lot of guys that can make an impact right there at the top of that zone as a point guard for Syracuse. It's I don't want to say we saw it coming, but when you look at how the back and forth with Joe Girard and Kadary Richmond, when you look at how Jim Boeheim said at times that his conditioning wasn't there, that may have factored into it. We just don't know what went into his decision as of yet, but there's a lot of things that could have went into it. When you know that you're probably the best guard on the team and you're not getting the minutes that you want, that can have an effect on you.
I think that's where the frustration comes from the fans here, because this was not a woulda, coulda, shoulda. This was not a player that may or may not have developed into something. They saw what he could be. And, Mike, we even saw it at the end of the year. He was starting to make some outside shots. He was attacking the rim more. Like, you saw this player coming into form. What would an offseason of work, really concentrating on a shot? I mean, this kid, just the sky was the limit here. And while Jim Boeheim said all year long that we need all three guards to win, I think that's something most people agreed with. But what I don't think people really got past and now won't get past is that Kadary Richmond is just a better player than Joe Girard in many different boxes that you would check. Joe has a role. Joe certainly did well in the first two games of the NCAA tournament. He scored 12 points against Houston, but nobody had a good offensive day against that team, the way that they shut down Syracuse on the offensive end. He did score 12 points in that game, but it was kind of hodgepodge together. So Joe's got a role, but if you're just stacking it up, Kadary's the better player. So now we're in an era, Mike, where if you're a Kadary Richmond, you've got options. You just mentioned two schools right there that are already on him. There's going to be more suitors lining up. And see, this is the fascinating thing, Mike, with this transfer portal, right? Yeah. We were in the one and done era, right? But it was a small percentage of players that you would fear losing to the NBA. There's only 60 NBA draft picks, right? There's literally over 1,000 players in the transfer portal. The grass is not going to be greener on the other side for all of them. But for a guy like Kadary Richmond, he stands out above the crowd. So he's going to have every opportunity to go somewhere else and be a star. And that's where the frustration lies, I think, from the fan base.
Yeah, it's a good point. You mentioned there are over 1,000 players in the transfer portal. And then what does that do to the recruits that are coming in? I think that changes the game completely. Like if you're a 5-star, 4-star recruit and you think you're coming in and you're about to get a lot of playing time, but next thing you know, the program that you're going to, they just got a transfer who was probably even as good or better than you in the class previous to. Like, what does that do to your status? Does that stunt your growth? And are you thinking about that? So it's definitely interesting to see how that's going to play out. And we got Syracuse has Benny Williams coming in next season.
Who's a forward.
Yeah, who's a forward.
Yeah.
But I'm sure they're gonna try to get some guards in this class in the next couple of years. So
Mike, think about this. We just said it. There's 1,000 players in the transfer portal. Now, if I'm this coaching staff, how do I sort through that? How much time do I spend recruiting in the traditional sense versus sorting through this portal? You got to call coaches, you got to sort through film, you got to go through scouting reports. That's a lot of time invested into, okay, who are the players that we are going to target to replace the players we're losing? It's like just a game of musical chairs. Everybody's just shifting around here. But look, players see an opportunity here. Mike Waters had a great explainer on syracuse.com about the portal today that I would encourage people to read. But it's a mixture of the 1-year waiver is going away, right? Before, you had to wait a year to transfer. That's done. You mentioned Kadary can end up at Florida State. Intra-transfers in the league used to be against the rules. No longer the case, right? So there's more opportunities for players out there, but they got to be careful about the decisions they make, where they could go. If you're willing to take a step down, if you will. I mean, Syracuse, for all the discussion we're having here, Mike, 4 days ago, they're in the Sweet 16. Okay. We're talking about a team in the Sweet 16. And now today, it's like that meme, that guy sitting there with the coffee. This is fine, and everything is burning around him. It's crazy how quickly things can change.
Yeah. And you saw it with the women too. Like one day you're playing UConn in the second round of the NCAA tournament. And then the next half of your roster is gone. And you don't know what your team is going to look like next season. It's just a testament of how fast things can change and how much the NCAA has changed just over the past couple of years. Like when you used to talk about a guy transferring, the first thing you thought of is, hey, we won't see him for a while because he has to sit the first year. And now with the new NCAA rules, like guys can go and play immediately.
It's incredible to think about the changes we've seen. Name, image, and likeness rights are coming soon, which, by the way, they deserve and should get. And the sport, it's a new normal here. So here you have Jim Boeheim, a 76-year-old Hall of Fame head coach who just completed his 45th season, has seen it all. But even he hasn't seen this, right? The unprecedented world we're in going into this transfer portal era, players having more power, moving around. Now, what's interesting to talk about the women's side, Mike, is you cover them closely. There were players that transferred out that got playing time, right? Emily Angsler was the 6th person of the year. Kiki Lewis played big minutes for Syracuse. Okay, Digna Stropman, big minutes for Syracuse. There were some other players that transferred out that, maybe were up-and-comers, young players. A few of them were suspended at the end of the year for what was described as protocol reasons, right? So on the women's side, you look and it's like, okay, that's 8 players, even in this new era we're in, where a lot of schools are losing a lot of players. I saw Wake Forest has lost like 6 players. North Carolina has lost a bunch of players. Jim Boeheim told me on the radio yesterday, he talked to Jay Wright. Jay Wright is going to lose 4 players. So that's out there on both the men's and the women's side. But man, 8 players, including 3 that, either would have played big minutes here at Syracuse or just are good players in general. So we don't want to speculate here, but you got to look at that and say, is there something else that would cause this many players to flee a program in this circumstance?
Yeah, it immediately makes me think. And I talked to a football recruit, Malachi Davis, who committed to Syracuse the other day. It immediately makes me think like, hey, what is the program telling you before you get here and what really happens once you're in the program? And we never know. Obviously, there's a lot of limited access. We aren't able to talk to players as much as we used to. But you really never know what's going on in the program.
And you know what, Mike? I want to respect the players, and they have every right to do what is best for them.
Yeah.
I think it would be very helpful if one of them would speak, though, because we haven't heard from anybody, right? Robert Braswell, John Bullet-Jock, Kadary Richmond, none of the women's players have spoken publicly. I think it would help everybody to understand what's going on here. And again, I want to be respectful of their privacy. It's their choice, and they absolutely have the right to do that here. But the less that's said publicly by the players, the less that's said publicly by the coaches, and Jim Boeheim did discuss it vaguely yesterday with me. It was funny. I was actually on the radio with Jim, and the John Bullet-Jock news and the Robert Braswell news broke while I'm talking to Jim Boeheim live on the radio, and I brought it up to him, and he respectfully declined to comment on it. And that's what he said, Mike. He said, I want these players to be the ones that handle this, say what they have to say, do what they got to do. So eventually someone's going to talk, and they're going to explain why. No 2 cases are the same here, but what happens is when no one talks, speculation runs wild here. And you can only look at the trail to the point we've gotten here, and people kind of wonder, man, what the heck is going on here? But I guess if it's any comfort, Syracuse fans, look around the country, okay? There are players fleeing programs all over the place. Syracuse is a unique circumstance based on some of the things we said there, but this is the new normal in college basketball. So, Mike, I guess we got to ask, is this good for the sport? Is this bad for the sport? Like, we're seeing this experiment play out in real time here.
Yeah, I think it's good for the sport, but I think it's a temporary type of thing. I don't think it'll ever get as crazy as it is right now. I think because of the coronavirus, because certain rules have been in place for this season and maybe possibly next season, that this is probably the first and maybe the last time that we'll see it as crazy as it is right now. But going back to John Bowl and Robert Braswell, I think it's pretty reasonable why he decided to enter his name into the transfer portal. He wasn't getting the minutes. He wasn't getting any playing time. He was playing behind Jesse Edwards, Barama Sidibe. So I think that can be a reasonable assumption. But Robert Braswell, man, his playing time skyrocketed the more he played. He played a pivotal role for this team, and it's definitely interesting to see a guy like him go.
By the way, Mike, we haven't even mentioned Quincy Guerrier. Quincy Guerrier is going to test the NBA draft waters. Now, he can come back. Tyus Battle did this a couple of years ago, tested the waters, returned for another season. So, and by the way, that's smart. Yeah. By the way, Quincy Guerrier is 22 years old. So he's in a different circumstance here. Do I want to stay in college? Do I want to still work on my game here? But testing the draft waters is smart. You go right to the people that are going to be drafting you. They evaluate you. They tell you exactly what you need to do and what you need to work on. Yeah. You get feedback, and then you can make a decision to come back. That process has worked out for the better in recent years. But what if Quincy goes into the system and likes what he hears and works his way into being an NBA draft pick? He was showing up on some what I would call reputable mock drafts, tailed off a bit as the season went along. He had that knee bruise and a couple other things. But, Mike, as you know, you're a big basketball fan, big NBA fan. What they do in the NBA is it's not what we hear all the time is he's not ready for the league. It doesn't matter if you're ready for the league. They draft on potential upside and what I can make this player into, right? And remember, there's a G League. That's where Elijah Hughes is now. So what if Quincy Guerrier gets added to a list of players we mentioned and some we didn't, that for whatever circumstance don't return to this team next year? It's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, I've always been on the player side. If you have a chance to change your life and change the life of your families, you go for it. Tomorrow's not promised. You could get hurt in a practice, in a game, and that can be the end of your career. So if you got a chance to make your dream happen, to achieve something you always wanted to do ever since you were a kid, I say go for it.
Well, Mike, I see some comments piling up here. Thanks to everybody watching wherever you are today. We will put this up on, so if you're watching on YouTube, it archives automatically on our Syracuse Orange Sports YouTube page and on Facebook as well. So we'll send this out for those that aren't watching on social media if they missed it. But hey, thanks for checking in live with us here today, this afternoon. Busy times for sure. We should also note, Mike, that you can come back to your original school, right? If you put your name in the portal, that's not, you're gone. You can come back. There was actually a case at Syracuse, different sport, but Stephen Reifus from the Syracuse men's lacrosse team put his name in the portal, I want to say in December, and ended up coming back and is having a terrific year, by the way. So we should note that you can't come back. Let's see. Just everybody so far, just scrolling through, Mike. People are upset. I like this comment from Michael here where he says, just wow, it's like free agency.
Yeah.
Pretty spot on, right, Mike? This is kind of the NCAA version of free agency.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think we can definitely report this. Frank Anselm, he put out the tweet and said, more to come. Just dominoes that are going to start falling. And then he deleted it. So
nothing's ever deleted on social media. Don't forget that, friends. Before as the great Herm Edwards says, don't hit send. Don't press send. Antonio says, we now have no true point guard. Joe and Buddy are the same player, both very good shooting guards, but neither a point guard. I don't blame Kadary. He can't develop his talent sitting on the bench or only playing 10 to 12 minutes per game. Now, he played more than 10 to 12 minutes per game, to be fair. But where I agree with Antonio, Mike, is this team doesn't have a true point guard. Joe's not a point guard. Joe's a shooting guard that's playing point at this point, no pun intended. Kadary was a pure point guard, a 6'6" guard, hard to defend, great defender, attack the rim. Think of that wingspan at the top of the zone, right? 6'6" with him, 6'10" wingspan, 6'6" with Buddy. It just stings to lose a player like that. And now you got to go find, to Antonio's point, a pure point guard, somebody that can, the sport's always evolving and the position evolves. But I agree with that. Joe's not a point guard. He's a shooting guard that plays point.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be interesting to see who they get to replace all three of those players and what type of role that they're going to play next season.
I like this comment from Claire here who says, the new normal sucks. I just posted this to one of my fan groups. How are teams supposed to develop, get chemistry going, and improve if every year half the team thinks that the grass is greener somewhere else? A lot of people are upset we're on the bubble compared to the Big East, so-called glory days, and calling for Jim's removal. But honestly, with the one-and-done mentality and now the portal, it means it's virtually impossible for any team to have any kind of consistency. Now, I'll throw this in there too, Claire. Think of the lack of workouts and consistency they had due to COVID last summer. Now, that will be different this year. I think the offseason will kind of return to a normal rhythm, and they won't have the separation and everything we had last year. But she makes a great point, Mike, about how do you develop a team? I mean, that's why they pay the coaches the big bucks here. But you're just with constantly moving parts. How do you just like snap a finger and develop chemistry? Excuse me. That's a hard thing to do.
I definitely agree with that statement, but I also want to pose the thought of what about the Blue Bloods, the Kentuckys, obviously before this season, the Kentuckys, the Dukes, the North Carolinas that have these one and done superstar players who opt to go to the NBA every season. But when you think about it, every season they're pretty good. They bring in pretty good recruiting classes, and they may take a while to gel when the season first starts, but eventually they find a way to pull it together. I think
I'm sorry. I'll say this in Syracuse's favor to kind of go off what you said there.
Yeah.
Duke did have a down year.
Yeah.
Didn't make the tournament. Kentucky had a down year. Syracuse, straight line, right? Jim Boeheim's never had a losing season. 3 weeks before the season ended. They're not in the tournament. They make the tournament. They make the Sweet 16. No matter how many recruits they lose, players up, down, everywhere, they just find a way. The results speak for themselves there. They've been a double-digit seed 2016, 2018, 2021, and they made deep runs. And now in 2019, they were an 8 seed and lost in the first round of the tournament, but that can happen. That's just the tournament. And look at Baylor. They're a Final Four team now. That's a lot of the same Baylor team you played 2 years ago there. So in the ever-evolving college basketball world, as much as it stinks right now, Syracuse has found a way. Now they got to find a way through the new normal here.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it goes from here.
Mark says we have Benny Williams coming in. That's it, not a point guard. And that's a good point because Benny Williams, who is a 5-star recruit, terrific player. Jim Boeheim said the other day he's going to make an impact the minute he steps on campus. I would anticipate him playing, particularly if Quincy Guerrier doesn't come back, right?
Yeah.
So you got to find a point guard in the portal. I mean, you don't have a choice there. Recruiting-wise, the 2021 class is pretty dried up there. And then you're looking ahead to 2022 as well. But there was a report out there, our colleague Danny Emmerman over at the Daily Orange said that a source told him that Kadary Richmond was told that Joe Girard's going to start next year at point guard, which again, why do we know that in March? Don't coaches have competition? Don't they let things play out? I mean, why would you definitively say that now? Wouldn't you want, just by natural competition, to see, okay, let's show up in the fall. Let's see where we're at here. And if Kadary wins the job. Joe would have to accept that, right?
Yeah, I think that's pretty natural and pretty normal. I'm really surprised to hear that if that is indeed true. Like, why would you say that right after a loss in the NCAA tournament? And, transfer season is approaching. It's kind of weird. I don't know about that one.
Let's see. Just kind of scrolling through the comments here. I always appreciate you guys checking in here. Brian noting that Kadary was a national steals leader this year in assist to turnover ratio. That's pretty rare. Few decisions like any Frost and correct hitch in. I think there was a typo in there, but point being, defensively, even in the limited time he was in there, Mike, he was one of the ACC's leader in steals, and that was the thing with Kadary. Like, there would be times, I can't remember which game it was recently, but I think it was San Diego State. But you look at the box score after the game, and the numbers don't jump out at you, but every play Kadary made in that game was huge. Right. He had a huge defensive play. He had the kick out pass to Robert Braswell for the 3-pointer. Maybe that was West Virginia. I know it was one of the recent games, but there'd be games where the box score wouldn't be impressive, but he made an impact. And then there'd be games you look at the box score and be like, holy cow, look, this guy had 5 steals in 12 minutes or something crazy like that.
Yeah, I think we saw him play his best ball actually when he was playing alongside Joe Girard while Buddy Boeheim was sitting out with COVID. I think he scored his career high against Niagara in that game. He had 16 points. That was second game of the season. I think that's when all Syracuse fans were like, hey, I think we got something with this guy here.
Yeah, remember, he had to start a few games when Buddy went out, not the time he had COVID, but Buddy had come in contact with one of the walk-ons who had COVID and had to miss 4 games. And that's a good point, Mike. That's when everybody was like, whoa, hold on a second here. What do we got? Right. And see, the frustration comes from, too, this is a credit to what Syracuse can do. Target a player, top 100, talent, bring him in, gets on the court, right away makes an impact. So I guess that's good news, in that Syracuse is good at seeking out talent and bringing in players that make an instant impact. Now, that's the traditional recruiting method here. Now this coaching staff has got to find a way to do it in the transfer portal. And Mike, if you're in the portal, there's a reason you're there, right? Most of the time it's playing time, but there's other reasons. So it's not just what you have to sort through in terms of their physical skills, their basketball skills. Now you got to play amateur psychologist too. And when you talk to this player, you have to say, okay, well, why weren't you happy at fill in the blank school? And why would you be happy here? And one way or the other, you're taking a risk on that. And Alan Griffin is a good example of that. Yeah. For 90% of the season, that worked out. But, man, the last 4 games, I don't know what happened to him. 8 points in 4 games defensively, really shut down. Robert Braswell was kind of knocking on the door because he was playing so much better. But even Griffin struggled. And Mike, here's the other X factor in going into the portal when it comes to Syracuse. Learning the zone, not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, especially if you didn't play zone in high school. It's a completely different zone when you're coming to Syracuse. And I know Jim Boeheim and his coaching staff, they recruit guys who look like and who have the feel to kind of play that zone. But once you get here, you have to really lock in, pay attention to how defensive rotations work. And it seemed like Alan Griffin had a tough time doing that this season.
I like this question from Adam here. He says, name a player that transferred from Syracuse and played great at the new school. Now, he makes a good point there.
Yeah.
These are just names off the top of my head. But Torian Thompson goes to Seton Hall. Never heard from him again. Jalen Carey, Howard Washington. There's a name. Who's the other guy that transferred off? Bryson Goodine.
Yeah.
Now, he played a bit at Providence, but it's not like they went elsewhere and became stars. Right. So there's got to be a name or two that did transfer and were successful. I just can't think of anybody off the top of my head here, but it's a good point by Adam. When Jim Boeheim brings you in, evaluates you and says, maybe this isn't going to work out. A lot of these guys that have transferred out haven't exactly gone gangbusters. Now I'm going to put my chips in the middle of the table, Mike, that Kadary Richmond is going to be a good player wherever he goes. Right. Like he's the exception.
So. I agree.
Yeah. And Pete says here, Brent and Mike, do you really think that Girard is better than Richmond? Can you answer this question? Absolutely not. I hope I didn't give that impression, Pete. I think we both agree that Kadary is a much better player, top to bottom, than Joe Girard. I think we were just saying both kind of had a role on this team and would continue to have a role on this team. But absolutely, Kadary Richmond's a better player than Joe Girard. There's no doubt in my mind about that. Mike, I think you would agree with that.
Absolutely. But there are certain things that both players can do better than the other. Joe Girard is by far a greater shooter than Kadary Richmond. Kadary Richmond is a greater ball handler. He can also penetrate and get to the hole, and he's a better defender. So it just depends on what type of role you want that player to play.
BJ Johnson, I see a couple of people commenting there. Yeah, BJ Johnson was a great transfer. That's a great answer to that. Transferred out about, 4 or 5 years ago and went on to go to a pro career. So there's an example of a player that does move on and will be successful. And again, I would bet every dollar I have in my wallet right now and then some that Kadary Richmond's going to be good no matter where he goes. So, Mike, we're only at the beginning here, my friend, right? We'll see who else goes into the portal and how this crazy college basketball offseason goes, who Syracuse brings in to replace these players. A lot going on there. So as we say, stay tuned, friends. We'll be writing about it. We'll be covering it for you on syracuse.com with Mike Waters and Donna DeTota, Mike Curtis here, Chris Carlson. Everybody will be on this for you. We'll continue to track it for you. And Mike and I will pop on here and do a show like this when news warrants and when things are buzzing as they were today. So thanks for hanging out with us today. We will talk to you again next time here. Enjoy the rest of your week. Oh, Mike, you got one more thing?
Yeah, I will say we know there's one person that's not transferring, and that's Buddy Boeheim.
That's right. We know that. Let's end on a note we do know. In a world of what the hell's going on, we do know this. Buddy Boeheim on the roster. And will Jimmy Boeheim join him? Stay tuned for that. Hey, thanks for hanging with us today, everybody. We'll talk to you again next time. For Mike Curtis, I'm Brent Axe. Have a great rest of your week.